They said you look like peace, but they didn't know your storms. Someone swore you look like their answered prayer. They said you look like love, but you've only ever been left. They said you look like her, but your heart carries galaxies she'll never hold. You remind them of someone they begged God to return. You look like someone they can't forget, even if they never met you. They called you beautiful. They didn't see the ache behind your eyes. You look like grace, but walk like grief. They said you look like his ex. You feel like his redemption. They said you look like light. You are, but it cost you everything. You look like someone they betrayed in a past life. You look like home to the ones who never had one. You look like every soul they failed to love right. They said you look too soft, but your silence holds storms. You remind them of a love they never deserved. They said you look like the one that got away. You look like prophecy to those still trapped in patterns. They said you look like her, but you carry fire she never dared to touch. You look like peace, but bleed like war. Someone sees their mother's heartbreak in your eyes. They said you look like healing, but they never asked what hurt you. You look like the love letter they never sent. You look like joy, but they miss the nights you begged God to take you. You remind them of the woman they prayed for after losing everything. You don't just look like her. You carry the redemption she never offered. You remind them of a time they still feel guilty about. You look like clarity to someone drowning in confusion. You look like a miracle, and it terrifies them. They said you look like luck, but it was always love. They compared you to her, but it's your presence they ache for. You look like the apology they never had the courage to say. They said you look like an angel. They didn't see the wounds behind your wings. You look like someone he begged God not to forget. You resemble the dream they buried in shame. They said you look like too much. You are always too divine to be measured. You look like his forever, even if he doesn't know how to hold it. They see her face, but feel your soul. You look like resurrection to someone who's spiritually dead. They said you look like déjà vu. Maybe you're a second chance. They called you familiar. Maybe they met you in another lifetime. You look like every chance they didn't take. They see their past in your walk, but their future in your eyes. You remind them of every prayer they stopped believing would be answered. You look like heartbreak, but you carry holy hands. They said you look like magic, but it's your mercy that haunts them. You resemble someone they're not ready to lose again. You look like the reason they can't sleep. They said you look like her, but only you made their soul weep. You look like someone who survived 1,000 endings. They said you look like peace. You are, but peace was purchased through pain. You remind them of who they used to be before they broke. You look like closure, but you open every buried wound. They said you look like her, but you feel like home. You look like light to someone stuck in a tunnel. You are the reflection they tried to forget but needed to see. You remind them of a love they fumbled. You look like the reason they still believe in second chances. They said you look like the woman in his dreams. You are. You look like forgiveness in human form. You remind them of who they pretended they didn't need. You look like someone who knows too much pain to pretend. You don't just resemble her, you reflect healing. They said you look like someone who left too soon. You carry the scent of something they thought they lost forever. They see their redemption in your resilience. You look like poetry they were too illiterate to read. You look like someone who's been resurrected more than once. You remind them of the story they were too afraid to write. You look like the chapter they weren't ready for. They said you look like light, but no one asked what you burned to shine. You look like someone they'll regret forever. You resemble a goodbye they never got to give. You look like a beginning wrapped in an ending. You look like fate disguised as flesh. You resemble a memory they swore they'd buried. You look like closure, but they keep hoping you'll open again. You look like everything they begged for, just too late. You're the echo of a yes they never honored. You remind them of mercy in a world that forgot how to offer it. You look like someone they should have kept praying for. You remind them of who they were before they stopped feeling. You look like the dream their pride couldn't protect. You look like someone their soul promised to find again. You resemble a love that keeps reincarnating. You look like rain in a drought of emotion. They said you look like her, but her eyes never spoke to their soul. You look like destiny dressed in heartbreak. You look like the answer to the question they never asked out loud. You look like a warning disguised as wonder. You resemble every feeling they denied themselves. You look like a miracle they weren't ready to honor. You look like the part of them they abandoned. You look like the answer they ran from. You remind them of God's voice when it was soft. You look like healing, but they mistook it for harm. You're what their soul called for before they knew your name. You look like someone their mother once dreamed about. You resemble hope after a storm. You look like someone who returned from the dead just to love again. They said you look like déjà vu. Maybe you are. You look like someone they almost deserved. You look like love they tried to unlearn. You are what they feared because you're what they need. You look like the part of them they don't show the world. You look like someone who's been watched by angels. You resemble the prayer they only whispered once. You are what they couldn't name, but never forgot. You look like prophecy wearing perfume. You resemble a song they played in their darkest hour. You look like a whisper in a war. You are the ending they never wrote. You look like someone who left a holy ache behind. You look like the answer to their silence. You resemble the feeling they thought was extinct. You look like a new chapter in their ancient grief. They said you look like her, but only you made them believe again. You are what they saw in visions and now can't unsee. You look like truth in a room full of mirrors. You are the mirror that showed them their soul. You look like mercy after judgment. You look like someone who still believes. You are the thread in every story they tell with shaking hands. You look like the healing they couldn't buy. You look like the final scene they keep replaying. You are the moment before they broke. You look like peace, and it terrifies them. You look like the breath they held in every past love. You look like stillness in a world full of noise. You are their memory's most painful blessing. You look like love, but carry judgment in your eyes. You are the ghost that feels warm. You are the past life they still grieve. You look like home after exile. You look like prayer on two legs. You are what they tried to replace and failed. You look like someone they never deserved. You are what their heart whispered when it still had hope.